The Utah Jazz just lost a heartbreaker of a Game 7 after the Denver Nuggets came back from down 3-1 to take the series. The Jazz will now head into the offseason with more questions than answers, and it's tough to see where they will go from here. The team has most of its core under contract for one more season, but will we even get to see this team next year? Welcome back everybody, it's Courtside TV, and today we're going to be talking about the Utah Jazz. Donovan Mitchell just turned in one of the best performances of his young career, taking control of the offense in a head-to-head competition against Denver guard Jamal Murray. In the end, the Jazz came up short, but Mitchell was not the issue whatsoever. Donovan Mitchell is becoming a superstar, but it's up to the Jazz to put the right team around him to give him the pieces to succeed. The Jazz bench is paper thin, and they needed those big scoring games from Mitchell for them to even be in this series in the first place. He'll need an extension on his rookie deal very soon, and I would assume that he stays in Utah at least for the next couple seasons, but if he is unhappy with the direction the team is going, they're pretty much on the clock here. Mitchell is the best player on this team, and they'll do what they have to do to keep him. All aspects of Mitchell's game have grown tremendously throughout his career, and as long as he can continue to improve his efficiency, he can be the captain of a very good team. Now, the Rudy Gobert question is where things start to get interesting for the Jazz. He's entering a contract year, and he will soon be eligible for a supermax extension in the offseason of 2021. There's been a lot of talk about tension between Mitchell and Gobert, and if they have to pick between one or the other, I'd imagine they would go with Mitchell. Couple that with the fact that they might not want to pay him that large supermax extension, and we might be looking at a Gobert trade in the near future. He's obviously a great defensive player, winning the Defensive Player of the Year award twice, but he has some work to do on his offensive game. He can't create his own shot, and he's basically just a rim roller and a lob threat, which limits his offensive impact. And while he's great as a paint protector defensively, certain teams can scheme him off the floor by playing small and just outrunning him. Players like Gobert are rare in today's NBA, and it's fair to wonder whether he'd be worth the supermax extension that the Jazz would have to give him to keep him. Mike Conley struggled for most of this season, but he started to come on strong when the Jazz entered the Orlando bubble. Suddenly his shot was falling, his passing vision was there, and he just looked like the version of himself that we saw when he was in Memphis. He's got a player option for around $34 million for next season, and I'm assuming that he'll take it, so he'll probably be back with the Jazz next year. Right now, I don't see a Conley trade taking place unless the Jazz enter full teardown mode, which I don't expect them to do because they have to keep Mitchell happy. He's just making too much money for another team to really want, and unless you're using him as an expiring contract and a trade chip to dump that salary away, I think he's probably on the team. And as long as he can continue to show flashes as he, gets more into the offense and is more familiar with the system and the players that the Jazz have, I think we'll see a better year from Mike Conley next season than we saw from him this year. Bojan Bogdanovic did not come to Orlando as he's rehabbing from a wrist injury, and it's fair to say that the Jazz certainly missed him. At times, he was their most consistent offensive scoring threat, and that's really valuable to a team like this that prioritizes defense. He's a big-time shot maker, and I think this series versus Denver would have been a lot different if he was on the floor. He is a key part of the core of this team, and I would expect them to keep him around for the duration of his contract. The rest of the Jazz rotation consists of Royce O'Neal, Joe Ingles, and Jordan Clarkson. Clarkson was great in the series against Denver, providing steady offense off the bench on a team that was really lacking in that department. Joe Ingles has been a savior for the Jazz over the past couple of seasons. He's a great defender, a good shot maker, and actually a pretty underrated playmaker, so Ingles is a key part of this team as well. Royce O'Neal is also great defensively, and he can hit a shot here or there, so he's definitely a player that I would expect the Jazz to keep around. Looking at the Jazz cap sheet for next year, they pretty much have everybody under contract at least for one more season. Jordan Clarkson is a free agent, and that will be a tough one for the Jazz to figure out. As I mentioned, he was great offensively in his sixth-man role, but he might be a little too pricey for the Jazz. I'm really not sure what the market will be like for a guy like that, a guy who can come off the bench, but might be a little inefficient at times and isn't great on defense, but he played a solid role for this team, and I'm sure that there are a lot of other contenders who would like to have him. I'm just not sure what the exact price tag would be. Maybe a contract similar to the one he's on right now, worth between like $10 to $12 million a season for the next couple years, I think is probably pretty fair for Clarkson. I don't know if the Jazz will do that, but I think it's something that they should highly consider if they're looking at running this same team back next year. The Jazz could easily say, hey, we had struggles with health with Bogdanovic being out, and Mike Conley wasn't too familiar with the system yet, so just give us another year, let's run this core back and see what we can do next season. If that is the course of action they decide to take, I would imagine they would try hard to bring back Clarkson. They don't really have any other free agents of huge consequence. Emmanuel Mudiay was he was fine off the bench for them. Honestly, he wasn't super great. And his career seems to kind of be hanging on by a thread at this point. So I'm not sure if they would even give him another chance to bring it back. I think that they would probably be more comfortable signing somebody else off the free agent market. So I wouldn't expect Moutier to be back again. And Juwan Morgan kind of came out of nowhere. He's still young, and he is a free agent. And he kind of, he just ended up starting games for this team in this playoff series after, not playing much during the regular season. So that was kind of interesting they decided to do that. But we will have to see if they want to commit to bringing him back. I think he showed enough in this playoff series that they would like to give him another chance. He's still young and developing, so maybe they do decide to bring Juwan Morgan back. But again, that's not really a huge consequence for them. They'll be just the same team without him next year. So the main problem I have with the Jazz is just their lack of depth. I mean, I pretty much listed all of their rotation players. We can go through them again. Conley, Gobert, Bogdanovich, Clarkson, Ingles, Mitchell, and O'Neal are pretty much their core pieces. And then beyond that, they don't really have much of a bench, and we kind of saw that come to light in the Denver series. Like I mentioned, they played Juwan Morgan a little bit after he barely played at all during the regular season. George Niang plays a little bit. Tony Bradley, who I don't understand Tony Bradley. He's never looked good to me, and pretty much every time I see him on the floor, he just embarrasses himself. So I don't really know why he's playing rotational minutes. I guess it was maybe just because of injuries to Ed Davis. But my point is that the Jazz are not a deep team, and they're going to have to find more depth off their bench if they want to really be a true contender, because they were paper thin during the Denver series, and every time Mitchell was off the floor, they would basically leave it to Clarkson to run the offense, and he did a pretty good job. But it was just kind of like once you get past those two guys, nobody can really create off the dribble. Nobody really can score. It's just kind of Conley setting up dudes who are breaking open threes. So they need a little more firepower off their bench if they want to really be a contender. And so I think that's their biggest priority for the offseason if they are running this team back again. I know, it's shocking. A playoff team wants guys who can create and score to come off their bench. Incredible. Those type of players are at a premium in the NBA. So the Jazz have a pretty good scouting department and honestly a pretty underrated player development staff. So maybe they can find a couple diamonds in the rough here or there, but that's what I would expect them to target in free agency and in the draft. Just guys who can create and score to come off their bench, because their starting five is pretty solid, but they just need more depth, more guys who can play minutes for them that you can count on late in games. So the Jazz are at a crossroads here, and I think this decision will be the biggest one that this team will have to make over the next couple of years. And it's the decision of, what do we do with Rudy Gobert? We know he's a pretty good player. We know he can defend, and he's a defensive player of the year caliber guy. But it comes to questions on offense. There's chemistry issues with him and Mitchell. They've kind of had some clashes in the past, and we just don't know if he's going to be worth that Supermax extension he'll be eligible for in the near future. So the Jazz might look to trade him as an expiring contract this offseason, and I'm not sure which team would take him. There's not a lot of teams who would really want to trade for this guy that has this expiring deal, just because of the uncertainty about his free agency and how much money that he's going to be paid in the offseason. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, but there is a solid chance that they trade Gobert this offseason. So here's just a couple teams that I thought of that have a couple of pieces that might be willing to try to trade for Gobert. Teams that have ammunition to trade for a star and might be looking to contend in the near future. I've got here the Raptors, the Celtics, the Nets, the Thunder, and the Warriors. It would be a risky move for all of these teams because you're not sure how much you're going to have to pay him in the offseason, and there's a chance he just leaves in free agency after 1 year. So you're going to have to be sure that number one, that you can keep him, 2, that he'll fit with your team, and 3, that you'll be a contender next season. So out of those 5 teams, I think we can narrow it down even further. I'm not sure that the Warriors will be interested just because they would have to give him that max, and they're not sure how much he fits with that team. And they would be giving up either Wiggins or Draymond Green, and not sure if the Jazz would be willing to take either of those contracts. So I'm going to rule out the Warriors for now. They're always an option, but I'll rule them out right now. And then I'll also rule out the Raptors. They have contracts that they can do it, but a couple of them are actually expiring this summer when you take a closer look. So it would probably take like Kyle Lowry, or it would be like Norman Powell and a bunch of other players. So it's either Lowry straight up or an amalgamation of players, and it looks like they're also trying to conserve cap space for the following summer, the summer of 2021, when a lot of free agents come up. So they might not be willing to trade for a guy who they'll have to pay. So I'm going to rule out the Raptors as well. So that leaves the Nets, the Celtics, and the Thunder. And let's start with Brooklyn. Now, we know that they're going to be looking for a third star to pair with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving as they look to, make that jump into true contender status. And I believe there was actually reported interest for the Nets trading for Gobert within the past couple of weeks. So maybe there's a little bit of something there. And the Nets have a package that would actually be compelling for the Jazz. If they're willing to give up guys like Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, and Jarrett Allen, I imagine that would probably be enough. If you just gave up those three with no picks attached, I think the Jazz would actually bite at that, because LeVert is exactly the kind of guy they need, who can create off the dribble a little bit more. He has size, he can defend, he's a good wing defender. And so I think that LeVert would be a player that the Jazz would really love to get their hands on. Spencer Dinwiddie, of course, would be a great piece for them to come off the bench and score. And, if they did that, they probably wouldn't need to bring back Clarkson. And then Jarrett Allen would just slide right into that center role and be able to take those minutes away. So if they were to able to get those three players out of Brooklyn, I think that would be a perfect fit for both teams, to be honest. I don't know if Brooklyn does it, again, because of the questions about his free agency, but if they're going to hunt for a third star and they think Gobert can take them to the next level, help round out their team, I think there's a chance that this gets done. Now, OKC is also an interesting one because they have a team comprised of a lot of veterans and then a couple of young players as well as a lot of draft picks. So they can potentially use a lot of those picks that they got in the trades, trading away Paul George and Russell Westbrook. They can use those picks to trade for stars now, or they can kind of wait for a couple of years and build organically from the ground up, like drafting those players and developing them. And I think that their strategy is probably a little bit of both. So maybe Gobert is a little bit outside of their timeline, but they certainly can get it done. And Steven Adams is also an expiring contract next year, and Adams for Gobert swap works salary-wise. So if the Thunder were to just say, here's Steven Adams and a couple of picks, and you want to do this trade, maybe 2 first-round picks, Steven Adams for Gobert, I think that's probably a pretty fair deal for the way that things are right now. So maybe OKC would be a good landing spot for him. I don't know if the Jazz would want to trade him within their conference, but I think that's, I think the Thunder would definitely consider that. And the Jazz, while Adams isn't quite as good as Gobert, he would at least fill that hole at center and allow them to keep contending. And if they think that, there's too much friction between Gobert and Mitchell and they just need to make a move, this would allow them to continue to be a good team and nab a couple of picks, and you probably wouldn't have to pay as much in salary if you were extending Adams in the offseason. So that's a move that could make sense for both sides. And then for Boston, it's been well known that Boston's been looking for a center for at least for this year. They kind of had that big hole at center after Al Horford left. And so Gobert would kind of fill that for them and potentially take them to the next level. Now, it would require them to give up Marcus Smart because there's no way they're trading Gordon Hayward back to Utah. Imagine if that went down. I guess technically, like, if they wanted to do it, they could do it and Hayward wouldn't have a say. And that would be really awkward, but I don't know if the Jazz would do that, just, accepting that deal for Hayward. So it would probably not be for Hayward, even though that works the best salary-wise. What would have to happen is it would be Gobert for Marcus Smart, along with Daniel Tice and Romeo Langford would make up enough salary. So doing a deal like that gives the Jazz a little bit more depth. Smart is a great player. We just saw him play really well tonight. And he could potentially slide into either a starting role or coming off the bench, depending on what they have with Clarkson and Conley and stuff next year. But he's under contract for a couple of seasons, so he could be a nice piece for them. And then Romeo Langford is a young player who can, develop and potentially become something. And Tice, he can play center a little bit, maybe be their starting center next year. I would assume that they would look for somebody else to maybe get that starting center role, but he could at least be a piece for them. So it would probably take at least a pick to get that deal done as well. I don't think Boston gives up quite enough value in a swap for Gobert without giving up a pick in addition to those 3 players, a pick, maybe 2. So I personally, if all 3 of those packages were on the table for the Jazz, I would take the Brooklyn one. just because it feels like you're getting the best value and the best depth for your team to kind of round out your roster a little bit more. Getting, guys like LeVert and Dinwiddie and Allen are all great players, and I think that would round out their bench significantly, and they would probably not miss too much of a beat, I think, if they ran that team out next year. And then the Thunder package is interesting if you're looking to get draft picks instead of win now pieces. Maybe you turn around and use those picks to flip another contract. But the Thunder package is interesting, I think. And then the Boston package, it depends on how many picks they're willing to give up to do that. So those are my 3 packages for Gobert. To the Nets, to the Thunder, and to the Celtics, I think are the 3 most likely destinations for him if they do decide to do a trade. So Utah is at a crossroads here, and it'll be very interesting to see what they do decide to do. I really don't know. It really could go either way. But for me, I would look around the league and see if you think that there's a package that gives you enough value back for Gobert. And if there is, I would pull the trigger. If you don't feel like you're getting enough, then just kind of keep him and ride it out and basically just run this team back next season, at least until the trade deadline. And if things are going bad, you can reassess then. But again, if that Nets package is on the table for LeVert and Harris and Dinwiddie, I would pull the trigger on that one. And then if Boston or OKC are willing to give up picks, maybe that goes down as well. So that's pretty much my thoughts on the team. I don't really know what they're going to do, and they have a very interesting offseason coming up. So I'll be keeping a close eye on what they are going to be deciding to do. And another option that I think that they have, this just kind of came to my head, so I'm still kind of fleshing this idea out, but if they want to shake things up a little bit, potentially maybe want to shed a little bit of salary in preparation for a max offer for Gobert, but I think they would maybe consider trading Joe Ingles. Now, I know that they love him and he's been a good piece for them, but hear me out here, all right? He is under contract for the next 3 seasons. He's making around 10 to 12 million per year. And that fits nicely. This is the Warriors fan in me talking, right? Golden State. This is the Warriors fan. That fits into the Warriors trade exception. And as a Golden State fan, I would like Ingles in that spot. I think he fits well, and he is under contract for the next couple of years, which I think is valuable to Golden State. It's somebody that they don't have to worry about extending immediately the season after they trade for him. So potentially that would be a fit there. I would not be mad as a Warriors fan to see Ingles in uniform. So I'm not sure what it would take to get Ingles from the Jazz. Potentially a pick swap. I don't think that would be worth it, trading down from 2 to wherever the Jazz are picking. But maybe there's something to be done there. You give up a future pick if the Jazz are looking to shed salary. So maybe there's an Ingles trade coming. And as a Warriors fan, I would personally love that. So we will see what happens with that, but that's also an option for them. So that's basically my thoughts on the Jazz. Like I said, it's basically 50-50 for me. I'm not sure which direction they're going to take this, but they do have options here. So it's either a Gobert trade or they run the team back. And they're going to have to find ways to get pieces around their core because their bench is really thin. So potentially they bring back Clarkson. Maybe it's flipping Ingles for more picks or pieces. Ed Davis has, a smaller amount of salary. Maybe there's a trade for him that's somewhere, either just dumping that salary or, trading him for another rotation player that fits a little bit better with them. But they're going to need more players who can actually be on the court and play minutes for them. So the Jazz's biggest priority, I think, should be finding depth if they are intent on running this team back. And I'm not sure if they are, but if they are going to run this team back, they need to find depth. And if not, then it's finding the best Gobert trade you can and pulling the trigger on that because it really could go either way. And honestly, like I mentioned earlier, that Nets package is pretty enticing if I was the Jazz. If you could get Karis LeVert and Jarrett Allen and Spencer Dinwiddie out of it, I think that's about as good as you can do. So I would think about doing that. But that's pretty much going to be it for my thoughts on the Jazz. Hope you guys enjoyed it. So we're going to do it again. Next time, I'm going to be back with whoever loses Game 7 between the Rockets and the Thunder. So we're going to be talking about the future of whichever one of those teams loses tomorrow. So that's going to be an interesting game. I'll definitely be watching that for sure. I'm excited for that one. It should be close. It'll be exciting. But that's that. So we'll be back next time with whoever loses between Houston and Oklahoma City. So thanks, guys, for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time.